Hey, Reading Lens listeners, Jason Banzoff here, producer for the Group Talk network of podcasts. Over the next few months, we're going to be releasing some of Nick's favorite episodes that he has done. And while this is going on, Nick is getting some much-deserved rest and preparing for a new season coming up. What's exciting is that this new season comes with a brand new approach to his show. Stay tuned for what's ahead. Enjoy this Reading Lens classic. Welcome to Group Talk. 4 shows, 1 podcast from the Small Group Network focusing on topics relevant to small group ministries. Whether you're in a church of 100 or 10,000, whether you're a volunteer or staff, we want to support, encourage, and equip you to lead well. So relax, listen, and enjoy Reading Lens with Nick Lenzi.
Welcome to the second episode of Reading Lens, a new Group Talk podcast where we will share you insights from books we are reading and what our takeaways and how we plan to incorporate them into our lives, leadership, and our small groups. I'm your host, Nick Lenzi. Today we're going to be talking about the book Know What You're For by Jeff Henderson. And to help me with this conversation is a good friend of ours, Matt Page from Southside Church in Peachtree City outside of Atlanta. Matt Page is the adult groups director. And he also hails from Louisiana. And one of the best ways I love to describe him for people that don't know him is that he is like a delicious bowl of gumbo. Every bite is unique and delicious and everything just goes together. So welcome, Matt.
Well, thanks. I think that's going to be my new nickname. I'm just going with Gumbo from here on out. That's it.
Gumbo Page definitely works, you know.
I love it. I love it.
Who wouldn't love to be a teammate with Gumbo Page?
I mean, let's go.
Yeah. Matt and I first met at the Small Group Network lobby out in sunny San Juan Capistrano. I'd love to be there right now. Even though it's sunny here, it's just always perfect temperature there. But we bonded over our loves of group, but then we really solidified our friendship when we both found out how much we love donuts and that we are donut seekers. Matt, have you had a good donut lately that you've really enjoyed?
I mean, for sure, always, right? I love a good donut, and I'm fairly certain that there's something theological that we can draw from that. Like, it's made in a circle, and it reminds us of how God's love is never ending like a circle. I mean, come on, you can't pass up these dad's theology jokes, or as groups guys, circles are better than rows, and so it just reminds us.
What a great excuse to bring donuts into your marketing.
Always.
I have never thought so. No Long Johns. No.
Nobody wants that.
Yeah.
No. Get that out of here. But man, when I think about like what's the best donut, I had a chocolate glaze with fruity pebbles the other day. I mean, you can't go wrong. I mean, straight sugar rush. But nothing will ever be. When we were in California, that was my goal every morning. Try a new donut shop.
Yeah. And there's one like across the highway there that's just so sneaky good that like I love coming back with it, and I will buy like 120 donut holes because usually there's about 100 people at that, and then just passing the box around the room, it's fantastic. I love ruining people's diets too. That's always a great thing to do. Like here comes temptation.
That's right. And no better time than a conference. Calories don't count in conferences. That's what I've learned. But nothing will ever beat the pineapple fritter from of all places, Danny Trejo's in LA. Like, who would have thought that man makes good donuts? But that
sounds amazing. I'm a sucker for a great maple glazed donut. I was visiting family in Charlottesville last week, and I was able to get my fix. But believe it or not, in Hoboken, we have no real donut places, and it's so sad. So please be praying for me specifically that we can get that
intercessory prayer for donuts.
Okay, well, this is not donut talk, but group talk. So let's dive into today's book, Knowing What You're For by Jeff Henderson. Matt, why don't you share with us a little bit about who our author Jeff Henderson is?
Man, I love Jeff. So Jeff is the lead pastor at Gwinnett Church, which is one of the campuses of North Point Ministries. But before that, he was over marketing at Chick-fil-A. He also worked for the Atlanta Braves before that. And one of my favorite facts about Jeff is that he was named by Forbes as one of the top 20 speakers you have to hear, which is really great because if you get the audiobook, you can hear him and read his book.
Yeah, this is I did audio and Kindle on this one, and he's definitely engaging. I got to hear him 2 years ago at Regroup, and his session, like I think about it almost like on a monthly basis. It's just he's an excellent communicator. No, go figure coming out of North Point that you're an excellent communicator. So
he is. He's great, and I just wish I could look as good in a blazer. That man he's got the blazer on lock.
Yeah. And I feel like one warning that we need to give if you're going to dive into this book, if you haven't read it already, is just make sure you live close to a Chick-fil-A. There's so many Chick-fil-A examples in this book. So don't read it on a Sunday either, because he probably talks about them every 4 to 5 pages. But every example that he uses is just so good throughout the book. He doesn't use just Chick-fil-A. He uses Home Depot and Popeyes, pretty much all those Atlanta area restaurants. So I'm sure you're really familiar with all the examples he was using.
I agree, because I think it's hard not to put the book down. It's like, man, how do I, there's so many reasons that this book is special. It's like, I don't want to stop reading it. And one of the 2 reasons I'm really for this book, if I'm allowed to say that, corny again.
Maybe get a ding noise every time we use the word as a pun.
I love it. It's because it's not just a church book. It's applicable for people all across the board, right? It's a leadership book, and so you can give this to somebody who's not a churchgoer or a believer, and it will do so many great things for them, regardless of where they stand in their spiritual walk. And the other thing I love that's so clear is that this book isn't written just for the sake of writing a book or just getting info out there. It's really who Jeff is. Jeff lives this out, and it shows through the way that he interacts with other people at Gwinnett as well as personally.
Yeah, it's really cool to have some kind of tangible examples that go along with it. So this book is kind of chalked through a lot of social media examples to use and things like that, which we're not going to dive into much on this podcast. We'll save that for a future one. But following Jeff on Instagram and his church, Gwinnett Church, on Instagram, you really get to see how they celebrate their community and really are there for others. That's really nice. That's not just like, hey, here's a book, here's an idea, and go figure it out. This is more like, hey, here's how others have done it, which is what I really valued. And then just to what he's trying to communicate here is that, the tension that he's building is that, we live in this hypercritical, cynical world, one that, is often known for what we're against, but he's trying to create corporations and businesses and churches that are more known for what they're for as opposed to what they're against. And this book, ends up having a hierarchy inside of it that there's really 4 fours. When I wrote that out, I realized but here are the 4 if you're taking notes with us. But it's one is for the customer, second one is for the team, third one is for the community, and the last one is for you. I think, Matt, one thing that would be really helpful to our listeners is if, we help translate these 4 into how they apply to us inside of groups. Obviously, this book is talking, I actually think he takes more of a business. He's talking more to businesses than he is churches. And personally, I kind of appreciate that, because I think our businesses fail to realize how they can learn from the church. I don't think anyone knows community better than churches. I realize we're the community guys inside of that. So obviously we would expect to say that, but I think that they do have a lot to learn from us. So I appreciated that he kind of led with that first. But I think one thing that I had that was challenging with this book is that I wanted to run down the hall as well and give it to all of the other teams inside of I'm praying that I can get my staff to get on board with reading this as well. But it's kind of like when you hear a good sermon and you're like, oh man, my wife needs to hear this.
Oh, that's a dangerous game.
Never goes well. Never goes well. So, okay. So let's try to translate this. So Matt, who do you see as the customer when it comes to groups?
Yeah. So when you look at customer, that's going to be, I think, primarily the group member, right? But I think, and we'll talk about this more, I'm sure. I think that we could split the load with group leader as well, because your leaders aren't going to leave for long if you don't treat them well. Matt and I were doing this a little bit beforehand, and one of the things that we came across with this is I was just putting together some ideas, and I put the group leaders more in team, which it definitely is, and Matt was sharing sometimes they're the customer as well, and I think he's right. And it's interesting, we have different sized churches, and I do think that as your church grows, that it's probably more likely that your group leader ends up becoming that customer, just because you don't have as deep a relationship as you do when you're smaller with those leaders with that. But we also put in here with a team that your coaches or your staff is as well.
And then community, still community, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's pretty. That
And
one's
then,
self-laid out, right?
But I do think it's important with that one that community is outside of the church. So what's interesting is like when you think of groups, at least at Hoboken Grace where I'm at, the people that I'm looking to get into our groups isn't outside the church. It's those in the congregation. I'm trying to move from congregation into community. So I do think it's important that like when we talk about community here, we're talking about it at large with that. So that was one of those tensions of like, there's maybe some gray there as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
As to that. And the last one is you, pretty obvious. But I love that was an element. No, yeah, sorry. Us as individuals, it's just important that I kind of didn't, we'll get to it a little bit. I didn't expect that to be a part of this book when we read it. But
right.
But anyways, so let's go back to customer. So we're going to, throughout this podcast, we're going to go to those 4 areas. And so let's start with for the customer. Matt, thinking of our attendee group members as customers, is this helpful or hurtful for you?
I think it's more than helpful. I think it's necessary, really, because we can't ever really assume that it's guaranteed that they'll connect or join into a group at all. And much like any of the other products that they come into contact with, they're going to have preconceived notions. So we have to show them why we're different. And that's why we can't just provide a service, but we've got to show them that we're for them. Just kind of like what the whole premise of the book is. And, the reality for me as I think about this is that I'm going to work so much harder if I'm pushing to have raving fans as opposed to just isolating myself to just creating great systems that move people through a process better.
Yeah, that is such a great way to put that. Like the motivation of raving fans, because like, so I don't know what it's like for you, but I've had times in the past where it's like, hey, we expect you to have X number of groups, right?
Right.
And then that drives you. And then you start like, there's times where like, because you're just trying to get to, 50 or 100 or whatever your number is of groups you're trying to get to, people can sometimes then turn into a commodity. And I think that's the same trap that like Jeff's trying to help these businesses avoid, of like, hey, you need to think of these as like, be their fans, be for them. And it's going to change your attitude to how it is. I love, there's so much of this book too that's like, stop taking the short-term approach of like, I just got to get the sale, right? And go to the long-term. What do we want for them in the long-term? Because if we can establish that relationship, then they're going to be with us for the long-term. And I think that same loyalty can be seen inside of our groups. The way that Jeff explains it that makes it helpful for me too is because he's so passionate about being for the customer. And you can't be someone without serving them. So I love how he encourages us to become fans instead of, fans of us again. He has this great quote that's in there. It says, winning organizations of tomorrow will be more concerned with becoming fans of their customers instead of convincing customers to become fans of the organization. So Matt, what are some ways that you've considered becoming fans of your group members?
Yeah, I'm sure we'll broach this more later, but as I think about it, Jeff mentions a couple of times the quote from our teaching pastor, Andy Stanley, and I work at a North Point strategic partner church, and so Andy's our teaching pastor as well, and we hear this all the time. But he says this, and it's so good. He says, "Do for one what you wish you could do for all." Mm-hmm. And I mean that gets hammered into your head. Yeah, so important, do for one what you wish you could do for all, and we've tried a few things, but I think the most successful thing that I've been able to do is by keeping up with this and with what's going on in my leaders' lives through constant communication, right? So whether it be through a scheduled one-on-one or through their social media accounts, and that's being followers of theirs or, friends on Facebook, it allows me to check in and see, man, how are your kids doing? How are they handling the new grade they're in or the driving lessons? Or, I saw, hey, they just celebrated their retirement party. So I can send something where that might not have come up in normal conversation. And I'm not going to be able to hit everybody's kid coming into the next grade or everybody's retirement party because I might not even know. But because of the way that we stay connected through those one-on-ones and through social media, we've been able to really dive in and be engaged in their lives in a way that I think can be missed if it's just a system or a process.
Yeah, I think an easy way to kind of boil down what you said too, that's super helpful in leading and loving your leaders and group members well is love the things they love, right? It's funny how that has made me a fan of way too many sports teams because
and some terrible ones at that. I'm just going to throw that out there.
But it's funny how I'll find myself watching a Georgia Bulldogs game. They're and terrible. Being like,
you're right.
I may not be rooting for the Bulldogs, but I'm rooting for my friend Rob, who's like a good dude. And it's just like, I know if the Bulldogs win, that Rob wins, right?
Oh, he'll be
and being able to be a part of him that kind of way. Or one of the things people love is their family, right? So when you're able to celebrate their kids' birthdays and things like that, one of the great friend of the network, Eddie Mosley, he was telling us once about a time where he was on a cruise with his kids, and it happened to be one of their birthdays, the days that they were on the cruise, and the cruise came to their door the morning of, brought balloons and celebrated them, gave them a sticker, all this stuff, and made him feel good. And you don't think that that's going to make Eddie completely loyal to this cruise liner. I remember Eddie was using the story just to teach us as my church doesn't even recognize my kid's birthday, and I'm going to make sure that never happens again. And so wonderful Eddie Mosley, shout out. Probably have one every podcast, but this has been your Eddie minute.
That's awesome.
Cool. Yeah. And one of the other things that great quotes from this section too, that he spends a lot of time with as well, is that engagement is the new customer service, and engagement is being proactive. I love that. That is the new kind of definition. So with customer service, usually they're just waiting for things to come. It's interesting. My wife has been on the phone the past 2 days with customer service for something she's dealing with, and it's one of the ones that doesn't do the hey, well, let's just call you back.
Oh gosh, you listen to that terrible.
Trying to think about that's the complete opposite of proactive. Is just hey, can you just sit there and wait for us to get to you, kind of thing. But when brands engage in meaningful, authentic, and personal ways, customers respond. So one last thing I'd love to hit on that I really enjoyed for the customer section was his chapter called "Small is New Big." I mean, being small groups guys, who doesn't get jazzed by that, right? But I think that what really stuck out to me was the warning he gave us on how growth can really disconnect us. So let me read you this quote. It says, one day you have a few customers, then you'll have a few hundred. Those personal touches that made such a big difference in the early days become few and far between. How can you possibly keep up? At some point, most businesses, leaders give into the reality of growing big. Before you know it, personal touches are replaced with efficiency. We scale the business by putting distance between human beings, and the heart of organization is replaced with a machine. Since we can't provide encouraging personal touches for everyone, we stop providing encouraging personal touches for anyone. Is that any wonder why so many large organizations drift off? I know, what's this quote just really brought things home for me, because, I started attending our church when we were 20 people, and I served on our staff as a volunteer before, I started serving on staff as a volunteer when we more than doubled to 50, right? From 20 to 50. Awesome. And I can relate to this because I remember several years later, just, you start reflecting on how easy it was to know everyone, right? And I'm personally really good with names, and it wasn't only till a little bit ago that, I used to know too who was in what group and all that stuff. Just a weird strength that I have of not just knowing the names, but then knowing you're in Sarah's group, you're in Todd's group, you're in
going through that Rolodex. Yeah.
But I've had to find new ways to make sure that we're not replacing, those personal touches with efficiencies. Have you also experienced that?
Oh, absolutely. Nick, this is one of the things I'm most passionate about, because I think one of the most important jobs that we have is to be the pastor of our people and be the pastor of the people in groups. And it's important to have great systems. Absolutely. I'll never knock that. Let's work smarter, not harder. However, in a church that gets our size, we won't have the chance to really develop relationships with the lead pastor or the teaching pastor. I mean, Andy Stanley's never going to know my name, right? And the reality is that our lead pastor might not know a lot of the people in our congregation, but often the groups guys, we're the pastors that they connect with the most. And if we're really connecting with people, then we're going to be the first one that knows when there's been a death or a wedding or a care need pops up within the group. And I've seen this play out even more so, I think, in the COVID time, but over the last couple months, or less really, I've had the opportunity to do FaceTime hospital visits because they don't let anybody in, right? So I'm FaceTiming people in the hospital.
That's impressive.
Oh, it was something. I thought I could talk my way in, I'll be real honest, but they stood strong. We had a couple funerals that I had the opportunity to do. I did a wedding. And these opportunities all have come out because I've connected with these people and because I've strived to help them find the best group fit for them, as well as connect them with people that I know along the way, so that they can feel more of a sense of belonging and family within a group. When you go to a church that's so large, you want to feel like people will know you and you're not a number, or you're not just the guy in the back row. And I think for us in ministry, vocational ministry especially, we can get so caught up in the meetings and the processes that we miss the people that we're designing all of this for.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like the old saying that you can miss the trees for the forest, right? If we keep the main thing, and we do for one, like we were talking about earlier, I think we can create some raving fans, but we have to be really intentional to do for one.
Yeah. I think what's important to remember here, what we just said just sounds like, man, that's a lot of work on us to be able to pull that off. And there's a little bit of anti-system a bit, but I would just more say the system that you don't want is it for it to be 100% you. Give other, the goal needs to be that 100% of the people are cared for, I think, and that, if that's realistic, that was a whole nother debate. Right. Find people that you can kind of, if you don't have it already, building a staff that goes with it. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I just a thought with that. I think as you look at this, as you want to enable your small group leaders to be the point people that really communicate that back to you, but also, you have a team. Everybody has a team, whether it's a team of volunteers or whether it's a team of paid staff. But everybody has different gifts and talents and skills. So leverage that. I know I'm not going to be the best systems guy out there, but my counterpart, JW, that dude is a genius. So I know that he's going to kill it when it comes to that. And so, man, let's leverage each other's strengths, and then we can truly, we can do together what we could never do individually.
Matt, we would make a good team. From those who've listened to multiple podcasts with me, I am super structured kind of guy. But my weakness is that care side, but I realized hey, we're in the people business. So I remember listening to Perry Noble podcast way back in the day. And that one just has stuck with me for so long because it's really easy for us to forget that we're in the people business, and that it's really easy to look through people or trying to use them and those kind of things. So it really ties into this section really well.
He wrote a great book too. That whole most excellent way to lead. So good.
Yeah. Cool. So hey, we could probably do a whole podcast on justice for the customer section. There's a lot in there about social media that we aren't even going to get to. That's extremely valuable.
So true.
And if you have any influence with your church in that area, seriously, pick up this book. There's some really, really great stuff there. Okay, so this next section for the team, as we said earlier, for small groups, this would be our team, our leaders, our coaches, our staffs. Side note, it's never too early to get a staff. We just kind of talked about that a little bit. So, I volunteered in my role for 3 years before I was paid. And I guarantee you there are people in your community who are passionate about getting people into community. Pour into them, give them opportunities to contribute and learn. It's weird. I kind of unlearned this and had to relearn it. There's something weird about once I started getting paid for this role, it was oh, you're getting paid to do it. No one else can do it. And that's just a bad approach. Teach other people how to do your role, give them that opportunity. This is really powerful for them. But Matt, what does it mean to be for the team?
Wow. No, not just a wide question there, huh? So Jeff actually lists 5 things. I'm just going to mention 2, and I'm sure we'll circle back to the rest. But there are 2 that really make me feel like, man, I'm on it and I'm developing a team that really knows I'm for them. One of the first ones, it feels a little bit like a gimme, right? Is believe abundantly, and the other is appreciate consistently. And I've been on teams that are motivated by prove you can or prove me wrong. and they're terrible. Like, it was awful. I hated that. That's probably why I didn't continue in sports any further than I did. And Jeff talks about that. But when I've worked for and with people who have relentless trust and belief in me, man, I'm here to tell you, I will overperform every time. And to that effect, that may start the fire in me, but what really fans that flame is consistent appreciation. And Jeff gives this example of handwritten cards, and he's right on the money. I keep those. I value them deeply. I love words of affirmation. Like, that's huge for me. So I've actually got some of those notes in my truck. I've got some in my Bible. I've got some in my desk. They fire me up. And here's the funny thing. Jeff doesn't just talk about it. He does it. I still have one from when he and I worked an event together about a year ago. And he took time right after that event to handwrite me a card. If I ever wrote you a card, brother, you wouldn't have a clue what I wrote in there. But and then he sent it to me, and I was just blown away by the fact that Jeff would take the time to handwrite something and send it to me. And then that sparked me to do that for everybody on our staff. So I did that for everybody that works for Southside.
Yeah, it's so Matt and I are both in North Point partnership with my church is a part of that network as well, and so we have a mutual friend who really supports us, and her name's Tracy. Tracy sends me like a quarterly handwritten note. And I think I've kept all of them. Like, it just means so much to me. I realize I'm already a words of affirmation kind of guy, but what did that? I think about like her just taking the time to be able to think that through and what she says, and it's just so encouraging. I know in our small group network Facebook group, one of the questions that comes up often is like, man, what kind of gift can I get my group leaders? Like, I don't have that much money. Listen, the price of a handwritten note is maybe $2 max, right?
Gotcha.
And then like the card, and that's probably $2.
If you draw a picture inside of that as well, it adds comical humor, and they'll definitely put it on the fridge.
But it's such an easy, great gift to do, and it's one of those things I found too. Like, I started doing this like several years ago, but you start getting better at how you value and appreciate people inside of there. And I've learned, like, never lie on these cards, like always tell the truth. But if you do tell the truth, like, it is really impactful, because I feel like so often, like, I don't think people see their own personal strengths. And so it's just so helpful and valuable to call that out inside them with that. So, so the first two were believe abundantly, and the next one was appreciate consistently. That was the handwritten notes that he talked about. The next one like hit me with like a ton of bricks, which is called develop intentionally, which is all about being prepared. And I'll have to say, like, this is not like a great area of strength for me. I'm really good in that I have a structure. I know what I'm going to say. I know what I'm going to do, that stuff. But then, like, when it comes to like the actual thing, like being prepared and ready to go, is super important. And he uses this to talk about how we waste a lot of people's time when we're not prepared.
It's so true.
And so it's like really being for the team. He has some really great examples in there from, this is where he uses the examples from Popeyes, and specifically when Cheryl Bach-Elder was a CEO there. Fun fact about Cheryl Bach-Elder: she was a former small group network lobby speaker and spoke on my 30th birthday, and it was a great, memorable talk. She is phenomenal. So probably a future reading Lenz book we'll do is her book. Dare to Serve, which is fantastic. But he uses her to talk about sort of two things, which is one, like being prepared for your meetings. And there's a really powerful example in there about like how she was coming with a PowerPoint to her meetings, and the meeting was about like getting a collective response, and her employees, her team just being like, when you come in with a PowerPoint, you already know what you want the answers to be. And therefore, like, can you just come with a blank paper and a pen, and we'll go from there. And it's just so good. And then the next one was the listen actively, and how she learned one of the best questions. If there's nothing else you get from this podcast, this one little 3-word phrase will save you, is just, hey, tell me more, which is, someone asks a question and they tell you a little bit about it. It's just asking them to tell me more, and they'll expand a little bit more on that. And the last one is then, live repeatedly. So in other words, repeat your vision as much as possible. If you, I realize we're kind of fanboys today of North Point, but this is probably one of the things that they are extremely good at, is that they work really hard on getting these things down to these tiny phrases and then repeat them constantly. So, you've heard us already once say circles are better than rows. I mean, if you go to those campuses, it's insane how much you hear that and know that. But, it's worth repeating so that they get it. So,
totally
cool.
Agree.
Yeah. All right. Next section is on community. So how can we be for the community? I thought this was powerful for us as group leaders, because the formula he gives is that we create a sense of belonging before we can get someone to buy something. And what are we doing as group leaders? We are group directors. We are providing a place for people to belong. And that's where small groups, in my opinion, have a huge opportunity within the church. When I hear churches that don't have small groups, it's just like, how do you belong at this church? How does someone get to be known? But Matt, how have you connected with your community outside your church?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. I think a lot of that actually stems from the idea that we can't lead people where we haven't been. And so we've got to be willing to go out and do what we ask them to do and go be a part of the community and invite people into the church. And there's two areas that I've really dove into. I have a heart for law enforcement, and some of my very best friends in the world are law enforcement. And another time I can tell you a long story about how we lost somebody in our church that led to all of this. But so I'm the chaplain for our police department. And so I think honestly and often as we work in churches, we can get so stuck within the walls of our church that we forget what it's like to be outside the walls of our church serving and sharing the gospel. And so I serve within our police department, which means I ride with officers and I listen to them and talk to them about all the things that they go through or process. I also am there to notify families when someone's passed away, walk them through the process with the officers. So I serve in that way a lot. But it's been really neat because there are guys that might never have stepped foot in the church that I spent 12 hours in the car with, and we break down into the things with their lives, and then it can lead to a time where they come visit. And some of those guys, it's like, it took a year before one would come visit, or, he would maybe come meet at my small group, which is off campus, or, maybe they came just for Easter. And we were able to build up to a place where I was even able to baptize one of the lieutenants recently. And I just thought, man, it was so cool to see how God uses all awesome. These things. Yeah, it's great. I love that. So that's been one way I've been able to stay involved. And then the other, I don't like to work out. Like, I don't love to run. I don't love to lift weights. Never saw that and said, that sounds awesome. I want to do more.
I didn't expect you to say that.
I'm telling you, it's the truth.
You celebrate your working out on social media.
I do now.
Quite often.
So one of the guys in our LDG, our men's leadership development group, talked me into going rucking with him. And I was like, that sounds terrible. And he's like, come on, man, it's going to be great. You'll meet guys you've never met before in our community. And I was like, the social side of me who's just like, let's go, outweighed the lazy side of me that said, let's eat donuts. And so, so I went, and you basically, it's derived out of military stuff. And so you have a backpack with X amount of weight in it, and you go walk miles, or you do some workouts in between, but it's not fast and it's not like stupid workouts. It's kind of like CrossFit, but just with a backpack. I've met a ton of guys in there that we've traveled places with and have gotten involved in small groups. And, it's been really cool.
That's awesome. Yeah, you talking through that and the ways that you just described that stuff. We have a motto here at Hoboken Grace where I lead that we don't just live here, we love here. And that's exactly what you're doing. And that's what Jeff's kind of calling us to, is like, be for your community. Like, don't just live where you are, love where you are, love the people that are part of it, get to know them. And so it's really cool, the relationship that you've gotten to build with that department. And I think it's awesome. Did they come to you asking, or did you ask to be the chaplain?
Yeah. So I've served as a chaplain in other agencies before. And then, and so we have a couple officers that work at our church on Sunday mornings. And I would just always check in on them. Hey, how are you doing? Can I go get you a drink, or can I get you anything to eat? And finally, one of the lieutenants said, hey, would you be interested in this? Unfortunately, we have a lot of chaplains that are just not able to relate to our officers, or are very close to the heels of retirement from, doing anything. And they just said, man, we don't connect well, and we would love a younger guy that could connect and take that for whatever you want to take it for. But the average age of our police officers is in their late 20s. And so I was able to really ride with them and sit with them, and it's just been a really cool process.
I think that's a really cool opportunity that I think is potentially like overlooked. Is because like if you ask me like what are chaplains, I'd be like, oh, they're in the army, they're in the military, and then they're on sports teams, right? And only think of it that way. But and maybe that's just because I'm from like the Northeast, where like we really try to keep religion away from everything. And but like, you know, is it possible in your area? Like, does your local school need a chaplain? So that like, you know, when trauma happens at your school, you're someone there that's able to kind of step in and say, hey, how can I help? Or you know, maybe it's the local hospital or other different places, but like everywhere needs a chaplain. And so like looking for those kind of opportunities to love your community well. And
it's got to be what you're passionate about, right? Like, I mean, I would just echo that with, it's got to be something you're super passionate about, because you're going to be moving out of an overflow of your heart, because you're already working a ton of hours or you're doing other things. You have to balance family and work and then this. So whatever it is, it has to be something that you absolutely love.
Yeah. And I love, he has this quote here that really kind of like drives it home, but it just says, the better you know your community, the better you know the community surrounding your business, church, whatever it may be, the better your business church can serve the community, the surrounding community. So Jeff, sorry, I just really messed up your words there. But, you know, I love his heart and focus on serving others that just continues to come through this book. All right. So this last section is on For You. And I'll be honest, like I shared earlier, this one threw me for a loop because the rest of the book is focused so much on other people. I didn't expect it to end with us. But Matt, what does it mean to be for you?
Man, again, you keep giving me these why questions. I love it. I love it. Well, the section talks about how we focus and develop toward our own potential. You know, because often we look for success, but it's not about just success for the sake of success, but it's our own potential, and how we move closer to that. So if we lose sight of our own development, it reminds me of the same thing that we often talk about when we think about spiritually pouring into other people. And I alluded to it a minute ago. We can't pour into other people if we have an empty cup. And we're given 7 practical ways to help you give the best you to the people around you. That's a lot of use. But that's the reality, right? So Jeff gives us 7 ways. And I wanted to be able to just highlight one and be like, this is it. This is the most influential thing in my life. But that was really hard. So let's recap all 7 real fast. Yeah. And then I'll recap. I'll come back to it. Cool.
I'll walk us through the 7. So 7 ways to improve you. So number 1 is move at a sustainable pace. So, you know, building in rest into your time and making sure that you're not always go, but really doing that. Second one is this concept of think 30. I'm going to skip over that. I'll come back to and explain that. That one really kind of stood out.
That makes me nervous. It sounds like Whole 30. I'm not trying to live.
Oh, that is kind of scary, right?
No, sir.
Third one is a great day begins the night before. Fourth one is find a mentor. Just a quick here, small group network plug. I've found the best mentors through small group network. There's people that I pretty much talk to on a monthly, quarterly basis that really have done a great job pouring into me. One of the best things about small group network is that and those mentors is they understand that group director role really well. And they do a good job at letting me know when I need to push forward or when something isn't normal, which is fantastic. But you need a mentor. 5th one is ask big. 6th one is find your voice. And the 7th one is be humble or be humbled. So which stood out to you? And then I'll go after that.
All right, Nick. So here's the deal. If you're going to force me into a corner, here's what I think I'd choose, because it's hard. It's so good. But I think for me, it's move at a sustainable pace, right? So having spent a long time in this season of full-time ministry, I've seen a lot of my friends and my mentors either quickly or eventually burn out. And the stats that come with, burnout ministry, washout rates are just astounding. I mean, it's painful. It's heartbreaking. But it reminds me of such an important quote. And again, I'm going to quote our teaching pastor, Andy Stanley. Don't sacrifice your family on the altar of the church. especially in a time of COVID where I think many of us are working remotely, or we're split between the home and the office. And it's easy to let work be every hour of the day, all the time. And you hear that phone ding, or you think, I can do one more thing. I don't have to commute, or I can do one more thing. Dinner's almost ready. And you can make it bigger and bigger and bigger. But, and I don't, this is controversial. Why not? You gotta have one of those every time you get on here, or people quit listening. So I'm gonna crank her up a notch, like Tony Satchery. Bam! Here we go. What good is all the work I've done if I lose my family, or they lose their love for the church? Just think about that, man. I don't ever want to be in a place. I've seen too many guys that have worked their butts off for the church just to watch their families walk away from Jesus. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I love about Southside is that even in the interview process, they told me, hey, we want this to be a place where if you have to choose between cheating on your time with the church or cheating on time with your family, you're going to choose the church. And they're getting it right, man. They get it right in that regard. So when Jeff mentions this quarter rest as part of the practical suggestions in this section, he hits it right on the head. Because regardless of, if that's a weekend away at the state park with your family, or just getting out by yourself, I think that's what I like about rucking. It's just me and, God, and just quiet for a minute, and me asking God if he'll take me about mile 10. And he says, no, I don't know why. But it's one of those things that it's so vital for me to find a work rest rhythm that's healthy so that I can avoid burnout. Speaking of coaches, I have a coach. His name is Tim Cooper, and I love Tim.
Tim Cooper's a great guy.
He is, dude, is so smart. And Tim told me this. He said, burnout is low grade fight or flight over an extended amount of time. And if we think about that, I mean, just the importance of that. Because I don't know many people in ministry who haven't played in that sandbox before, right? So if we can take the time to rest and refill, we're going to avoid this, or at least lower the chances of it significantly. And so for me, I think that's a passion for my team. You can ask JW as we're in this new season of what do we do next. Our church has just announced that we aren't returning to in-person services until 2021. It's like, all right, How do we hustle to make things, feel good for our attenders, and what can we be doing? But as we weigh these things, we want to make sure that we're not killing our team in the process. So how do we rest and work and have a great rhythm? And I think Jeff just nails it when he talks about this.
Yeah, that's so good. It's interesting. I wanted to jump in there, but you were on such a roll, and I loved it. It was so good. But when you were talking about Andy's quote about don't sacrifice your family on the altar of the church, and how we're tempted to do that because we can work all the time at COVID. It's like, it's amazing how you can sacrifice your family on the altar of church while you're working alongside them in the house.
Yes.
But I feel like maybe that just makes it worse because they just see like, look, Dad's in the building, but he's not actually here.
Right.
Which I think a lot of us through COVID with kids have really, really felt that one.
Oh, yeah.
But hey, so the one that jumped out to me was the Think 30, which we haven't explained yet. And pretty much what this is that it's dedicated time to just think. And I know that sounds like a crazy concept, but one of the other books I was reading earlier this year was Digital Minimalism. I think that has been in 3 podcasts that I've referred to now of a book that I've referred to. But he was talking about how like we have so much information, and it's constantly coming in that you're listening to a podcast right now, listening to 2 other guys' thoughts that, have you had time to just think for yourself? His was that like you just walk outside and go for walks and don't bring your phone. But I like Jeff's Think 30 because it has more structure. So it's like 10 minutes, 10 minutes, 10 minutes. And so you either take a piece of scripture, you take something you've read, or you just take an idea, and for the first 10 minutes, you think and you write down any ideas that you have. And then the next 10 minutes, you kind of expand on those ideas. And then the last one, it's like, all right, you edit and figure out like, what are my next steps coming out of it? So something I definitely want to try out and practice. We sometimes I do this. I don't know if you've ever heard of Lectio Divina, where you really chew on one verse for a good amount of time, but it's kind of similar concept to that. But yeah, really great book. Matt, any final thoughts before we close?
Yeah, I think I just encourage people, read this book if you haven't, or, if you're an Audible fan, listen in, because Jeff actually adds some bonus stuff throughout the book. Shout out to JW and his Audible addiction. I give him a grief all the time because I'm like, did you listen to it or did you read it? He devours books. It's amazing. But in all sincerity, I truly believe that this book can help a lot of leaders. So much so that I've given a few copies away with notes like Jeff has talked about, letting people know how much I'm for them. And I challenge you to do the same. It can open some really cool doors. And I love that. I think it'd be really fun.
Cool. Matt, where can they find you?
Well, I'm not as bold as Jeff. So like if you do read the book, at the very end of the book, he puts his cell phone number in the book, Bob Goff style. And I think I
saw that. He might actually have your number because of you working with him. So I'll have to text him and let him know. I thought when I saw that, I was like, I should text him that we're doing this podcast.
Heck yeah. That's a bold move, Cotton, but I'm not that bold. So you're welcome to shoot me a text or follow me on Instagram at the Matt Page like in the book. Don't add that I in there. Or mpage@southside.org. And here's the fun part. Let's sweeten the pot a little bit. I'm not going to be giving my phone number around because that's just crazy talk. But the first person who's not on leadership at SGN, y'all don't count. Get out of here with that mess. The first one that messages me, whether it be Instagram or my email, saying that you heard this here on the podcast, I'll send you a Chick-fil-A gift card because
there we go,
and a copy of Jeff's book.
Man, see what I mean about this guy just being generous and a delicious bowl of gumbo? Like, this is going to linger for the rest of the day, and you're just going to love and just wish that you had another bowl of Matt. So, awesome. Matt, thank you so much for being here. Again, I'm Nick Lenzi. I just want to thank you for listening with us. Thanks, Matt, for sharing your experiences and thoughts. We hope that you've enjoyed today's podcast. Reading Lenz will be back next month with another Georgia great, Steve Kern from Compassion Christian Church in Savannah. Go Bananas. Savannah Bananas?
I don't. I'm out.
Okay. You might have to listen to the next podcast, then we'll explain what Savannah Bananas is. It's this amazing minor league team that's there that is like the rage.
It reminds me of an episode
Savannah
from The Office.
Yeah. We're going to be doing the book Extreme Ownership, which I'm sure your rucking guys would love.
Let's go.
Which is Steve was in the Navy, and I said, hey, Steve, can you pick out a Navy book? And this is one he picked out. So I'm really excited. I haven't actually opened it up yet, but I've heard good things. And if Steve's recommending it, it's going to be great. But, as we leave, just remember, leaders are readers. Take care, everyone.
See you guys.